that's just a classic example. And I'm so thrilled to see you on the other side of the screen, because I used your name, Maurice Bloom, our partner on the ground, seriously. And so then, you became a human being that all my wonderful people in the pews could relate to.
This is another episode of a special series called Enough for All of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. This series sheds light on 75 years of an NGO called CWS. My name is Maurice Bloom and I welcome you to another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen.
Okay, good day, everybody. This is another episode of the podcast about Church World Service. And I'm really so happy with today's guest. Well, I'm always happy with my guest, but today is a special one. And I will ask her to introduce herself. Betty, please go ahead.
Hi, I am Betty Voskuil. I was the chair of the board for Church World Service from 2004 to 2007. But prior to that, I started out as a volunteer back in, now I have to think really hard on this one, but back in 1975, I became a volunteer when, and actually that was about the first that I had really heard about Church World Service. I have a nutrition background. We had lived in Massachusetts for 5 years when my husband was completing his graduate work, and I was also moved back to Michigan and was asked to become a representative for the Reformed Church in America, which is the denomination I've been a part of, to serve as a leader in hunger education for the state of Michigan. Obviously, I was representing, but we were actually trying to reach out to everybody in the state of Michigan. And it was at that point that I was introduced. We went on a weekend retreat, and I was introduced to two organizations that might be most helpful. And one of those was Church World Service. I'm going to say the other one because so many of us know it, Bread for the World.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Was the other organization. And so I had at this point, because of my nutrition background and because of my deep Christian conviction that we are to care for the hungry, the thirsty, the imprisoned, the orphans, the widows, etc., I had decided that probably I would dedicate the rest of my life to doing what I could as one person about those issues. And so this felt tailor-made for me. So quite frankly, I became a true believer after that weekend with a lot of just, I'll call them saints from Michigan. There must have been about 100 of us that had been gathered together for this retreat. We were all from different denominations. So it was, it was Christian based, and the two organizations, there were probably some others, but again, those two organizations were lifted up as being particularly effective, would be the word, I guess, in dealing with these issues of hunger, poverty, just you name it. I guess those were really, really, really important to me. And that is what I felt I could do with my life. If you want to talk about a purpose, it felt like that was what my purpose was and is still. So that was my introduction.
Oh,
Do you want to hear
75.
more?
Yeah, no, yeah, well, that's great. And so if I ask you, can you specifically explain what you like about the work of CWS? What would you then say?
Well, I'm going to go back to those first years because I learned about the crop walk.
Yeah.
And we moved from Kalamazoo to Holland, Michigan in 1977. And I looked around. We had lived there in the 60s for 3 years. And I had worked with, again, because of my nutrition education background, I had worked with mothers who were receiving some food aid. And I learned so much about them that totally changed my whole understanding and perception of people receiving. At that time, it was ADC, Aid to Dependent Children. That's changed now. But at any rate, when we moved back, I looked at Holland and thought, oh my goodness, there are so many resources here. I know there are still very hungry people here. By that time, because of my introduction to Church World Service and Bread for the World, I had learned, about the enormous hunger situation in the Sahel, in Africa, and in other places. And I thought, we've got to do something. But my concern was how to get my neighbors involved in doing something that they could relate to. And the whole concept of we walk because they walk. I knew I thought, bingo, that's it. They can relate to that. And so I helped start the crop walk in Holland in, I believe, 1979 or 1980. And the very first walk, we had 400 people.
Amazing.
Starting from scratch. We were amazed. But then we grew. I stayed with that, I don't know, for maybe 35, 40 years. But we grew in the first 5 years to having over 1,000 walkers. But we did that by contacting every church in the whole area. And getting them to buy in, and everyone wanted to do something. But then, of course, you understand that 75% of that money went to Church World Service globally, 25% stayed locally. So it was just tailor-made for helping people connect how they could be a part of the solution, both locally and globally. So then I joined the staff of the Reformed Church of America as the hunger educator. How do you like that? And eventually in the 80s then was asked to represent the Reformed Church on the board of Church World Service /crop. So at any rate, so I came, first as a volunteer, then as a board member, and then gradually just eventually became the chair of the board. So that's a bit of a long explanation.
No, but so yeah, it's I didn't know. I knew you were, of course, that you were involved with Crop Hunger Walk in Holland. But
and they're still
for
going.
so many years. Yeah, it's still one of the most successful.
10.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's top 10.
Yeah, great.
Which has been a great joy to me, because I'll have people come up to the street and say, "Oh, you're the crop walk lady." I said, "Well, yeah, partly." So anyway.
Yeah. Betty, I would like to ask you about the time that you were the chair. It was a time when Church World Service was had separated already from the National Council of Churches. Became its own 501(c)(3). if you look back, what were, and make, if I ask you, give me the top 3 of, the main concerns that you had at that time as the chair or you worked on, would you still be able to share that and tell a little bit about the time that you were the chair?
Oh boy. Well, I was the first vice chair when the
Mhm.
separation actually happened.
Okay.
Those were very, very, very difficult and anxious days.
Mhm.
I don't feel like I can talk, and I know I remember the numbers even, okay?
Yeah.
But that separation was necessary uh, because we were fiscally responsible for our own organization. And the directors, according to the laws of the state of New York, were culpable. I spent a lot of time with our attorney, quite frankly, to learn exactly what was at stake. My number 3, the first concern
Mhm.
in that separation and starting as the chair was how to navigate the pain
Mhm.
And the practicality of separating from the National Council of Churches, of which I was a vice president of that too, by
Mhm.
virtue of being chair of the board. But it was not an easy separation
Mhm.
because of finances, but also because organically we were one. In other words, our membership at that time of 33 or 34 communions in the United States was their membership. And so that was difficult.
Yeah.
I would say my number 2 concern was how to continue the ecumenicity, which I feel is so critical in our world today, in terms of maintaining our mission relationships, which is really what the NCC was about.
Mhm.
Were those relationships to different areas, and I knew, because I was a staff member
Yeah.
of the mission department of the RCA. I knew that we were pretty dependent on a lot of information and ongoing relationships with our partners. And for the RCA, excuse me, Michigan pollen, Michigan, we're in full bloom here, and allergies are too.
Yes.
Those partnerships were what we believed in very strongly.
Mhm.
So you see, personally, I understood that this whole concept of partnership was at the core of who we were and who we wanted to be.
Mhm.
We did not want to go anyplace and try to set up shop on our own.
Mhm.
We wanted to work with existing partners who shared a similar philosophy of operation, etc. So I understood the laws.
Yeah.
Number 3, I was just concerned financially.
Yeah.
How we were going to, because a lot of communions just told us straight out, hey, you do this and you're on your own. And I knew, that funding, there was no assessment
Mhm.
of communions. We were dependent on what communions decided to give us.
Mhm.
And I understood the budget all too well. And
Yeah.
because I was the chair, I felt a little bit responsible for that, because I knew we had, at that time, we had a large payroll.
Mhm.
And furthermore, I knew enough at that point. I had traveled enough internationally, so I had met a lot of our partners
Mhm.
globally, a lot of our global partners. and felt some real responsibility for maintaining, you know, our resources to share.
Mhm.
So they were difficult days. You know, just wanting to be sure that we moved forward as wisely and as responsibly as we could. Does that
Yeah.
does,
No, that's
does that kind of answer that
yeah.
question?
No. Absolutely.
It was a heavy load, let me
Mhm.
tell you.
Yeah.
But I loved Church World Service, and because I loved our partnership with other agencies,
Mhm.
and it was easy for me to interpret to the person in the pew or on the street,
Mhm.
because again, because of that crop walk part, you see, which was open to the community.
Yeah.
That wasn't just it was something people could really get their heads around
Mhm.
and their feet around, quite frankly, which you know all too well about.
Yep.
You know, but it was something I remember a friend of mine in the heyday of the Holland, Zealand. We brought the next community over into the title, so they'd feel more of a part of it because they were. But when the Holland, Zealand crop walk came up in the spring, my dear friend who was dying of cancer told me her whole goal was to make it to the crop walk in the spring and to walk at least a block of our 4 to 8 mile route. And, you know, I can't tell you the people for whom that became such an important way for them to still contribute to society, to live out their faith.
Yeah.
You know, I remember in the early board meetings, oh, bless them, there were a core of, at that time, before we changed the board membership, there were a core of people who represented their communities. And I'm telling you, talk about saints. Oh, it was so interesting because some of them would sit at the board meetings and knit away like crazy. You know, they were knitting scarves and hats and stuff like that. So it was just, I loved the cross section of society, because I love to get people from all levels of society involved and understanding, because of course the issue that we were dealing with is a very complex issue. There are no easy answers to poverty, to racism, to whatever you want to name it. They're all very complex issues. So trying to find a way for people to be able to plug in was always really important to me.
Yeah. Great. And when I listen to you, it's, you know, the Church World Service and the Crop Hunger Walk enabled you to help to connect people and to show them, you know, different contexts and have, you know, make help to people to understand,
Right.
you know, the issues around hunger and poverty. So the Crop Hunger Walk was also very important within that. I would like to talk a little bit about the Crop Hunger Walk with you, because as you know, we are still very fortunate that so many of the Crop Hunger Walks are still running.
Yes,
but similar to the number of people going to church, also the Crop Hunger Walk participation is a challenge, and especially reaching out to the younger generation.
Exactly.
Now, as part of the discussion, or part of the 75th anniversary, CWS is also kind of looking and looking at the past and how can we continue to reach out to that younger generation that is maybe less churchy than the older generation. Now, with a nice name, it's the branding, discussion that's going on. I would like to take one piece out of that, and it's not the only piece around branding, but so Church World Service is also having a discussion in terms of, because the word church, World Service,
Right.
with the younger generation, very often that doesn't even open a door. So
Right.
if we want to sustain ourselves, should we maybe consider changing our name? And it might not happen, it might happen, but I would just like to hear from you what your perspective is if the organization would decide to do so. Just to hear from you what your thoughts are.
I think it's a very, very, very valid discussion. I think 40 years ago when I started, it was a very different time. I'm very aware of the Gallup poll you're referring to that came out last week. Very aware of it, read it in its entirety. And I have noted over the years that a lot of similar organizations have changed. For instance, a sister organization, which had the very long name of Christian Reformed World Relief Committee, has changed to World Renew. I noted that, and I've noticed others. So at any rate, I think that probably it's a very, very valid question that has to be discussed at this point, and so I will understand if that happens. I do think that young people, in fact, I know because I have my husband served as the president of Hope College 2 years ago for 2 years. We became very involved with college students again. Yeah. Love them. Wonderful. And I know that they are so searching for meaning and purpose. They're also searching diligently for connection. They haven't given up on the faith, but they're looking. I'll bet I would have 10 students a week who knew that I had been involved in hunger issues because my other identity was the hunger lady.
Yeah.
And they would come to me saying, I want to do something meaningful with my life. Can you point a way? What's an organization that I can try to get an internship with? Who could I apply with? Here are my skills. I want to do something with purpose, and so I know that hunger, which is probably the wrong word to use for it, but to do something meaningful with their lives is very much there. And most of these kids really considered themselves more than religious.
Yeah.
They were really, well, most of these kids were Christian, but we had other faith groups too. But at any rate, I know it's there. So again, before we started recording, I mentioned to you that I was really happy to see Church World Service and Krapawak connecting more on social media. And because I have long thought that, or probably since about 2010, I kept saying, yikes, we've got to get on, because this was now, of course, some of the platforms I'm using are no longer relevant to this generation, but you all know what those platforms are. And I think that, we need to do a much better job, because I know people are still really looking for agencies that are credible. They do not want to, they're so skeptical of these fly-by-night, personality-driven organizations. I mean, they can smell a rat a mile away. Sorry.
Yeah.
But, they're very discerning.
Mhm.
And they're just really looking for places to plug in.
Mm.
So, yes, I am an old cheerleader. I don't want to see Church World Service or CROP give up the quest
Mhm.
for connecting.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And right now, about the only way we can do that is with CROP, but no, there are many other ways. For instance, I had so many people excited about making school kits,
Mhm.
baby kits, cleanup kits,
Mhm.
health kits. Our church one year put together 1,000 health kits
Mhm.
for Church World Service. It was, again, a tangible way they could feel like they were making a difference. And I don't know that Church World Service realized how connected that made them feel.
Mhm. Mhm.
It was huge.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and thanks for lifting it up. The challenge for any organizations is, of course, when because also new people came in, so they have
Yeah.
different stories. So how do you ensure that the organizational memory continues to be there?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
that's always a balancing act. And
Yeah, and that was one thing,
Yeah.
Maurice, that I was extremely concerned about.
Mhm.
When Church World Service went to a very reduced board size
Mhm.
and lost mainly some of the smaller communions. I don't even know how many communions are still represented. I know the board is very, very small. That was my greatest concern, was not only the loss of the organizational memory, which is very rich, but the loss of funding.
Mm.
Because what happened in my denomination when that happened is that our denomination made a partnership with a large competing organization.
Mm.
I'm not going to say the name because I do not agree philosophically with their modus operandi.
Mm.
I was just heartsick.
Mhm.
And at one time, Reformed Church in America was the number 4 funder for Church World Service.
Yeah.
That is when I was on the board. But, I was sad to see what Church World Service provided us, very small communion
Mhm.
like us, was a way to be able to plug in directly to being a part of the solution
Mhm.
rather than the problem. The Emergency Response Committee was absolutely incredible. I represented the denomination on that too.
Mhm.
And but we were able to, when disaster happened, I'm thinking of Indonesia,
Mhm.
your beloved.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Seriously,
Mhm.
I
Absolutely.
called Rick Augsburger and Donna Durr
Mhm.
the morning that I got the news and said, Rick and Donna, how can we plug in? What do you need?
Mhm.
What do you want me to work on? And that was just an incredible, that was just such a horrid disaster.
Yeah.
And for those who don't have the memory, it was the tsunami.
Yeah.
It was the terrible-
2004. Yeah.
Yeah. But you see, then I turned around and within an hour had a news release out to every Reformed church saying, this is what's just happened. They probably got my letter almost simultaneously with the news on CNN or wherever, but just said, this is how we are going to respond initially. More news will be coming, but then immediately churches were, because they trusted. We had such a long relationship with Church World Service. I had been very proactive in communication with the churches directly. worked very hard at that. So then we became, the little plug that could plug into the larger church world service, which could plug into the global.
Yeah.
And I think it was Action by Churches Together then, Maurice, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. That, yeah, which is now transformed into Act Alliance. Yeah. And Betty, I can say, because at that time I was on the other side. I was in Indonesia.
I know you were.
Yes, it was it was the biggest. Yeah, it was the biggest disaster I ever experienced, and it was so great not having to think about, how are we going to find the resources to respond. That was there. That was all taken care of. By the different members. Thank you for that.
Well,
absolutely.
That's just a classic example, and I'm so thrilled to see you on the other side of the screen, because I used your name, Maurice Bloom, our partner on the ground. Seriously, and so then you became a human being that all my wonderful people in the pews could relate to, because they knew we had a real live person, and because we were so small, we couldn't afford. I was the only staff person.
Amazing, yeah, amazing.
So, Church World Service was an extension to staff, and that connected to you. You became an extension. So that's perhaps the best. That's a
yeah, that's a great. Well, it's not only a great story. It was such an important. It was instrumental in the response for CWS.
And I personally knew of you then, and because of that strong connection with Rick Augsburger and Donna Durr, who were just incredible.
Yeah.
But I go back to thinking of the friendship trains after World War II.
Yeah, amazing.
The reason we started, and I still have people, because I think the friendship train, and for people who don't understand that history, that was when actual trains, different cars, loaded up with resources that could be shared with Europe and other areas, recovering from Northern Africa, etc., recovering from World War II. So from Michigan, for instance, came beans, a carload of beans. Don't ask me what kind, and a carload of sugar, because we produced sugar at that time.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I guess I get very excited about these anniversaries, because I've read every history book I could. I also understand the National Council of Churches, understand a lot of the dynamics, but just think of 75 years of those kind of connections and those kind of remarkable stories of faith and of sharing and of walking a mile in other people's shoes.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I always had cakes at our General Synod to mark like the 70th, or maybe the 50th. I don't know. I'm so old that I must have gone back to that. Just to try to, again, make the connection, because it's 75 years of doing this. I think it's terrific.
I would like to, because you were talking about, reading about the anniversaries. So, after 50 years anniversary, Church World Service made a book, and it was called 50 Years of Help and Hope.
Right.
So, you were part of the 25 years after that, a couple of years. So if I would ask you, if we would produce another book, and we are not going to, because we are making a podcast now, but if we would make a book, what are some of the keywords that you would put in that book, about 75 years of CWS?
interesting. It's a very good question. I would put partnership
Mm-hmm.
as one of the key words,
Mm.
because I feel like that goes both ways.
Yeah.
It's a partnership with the giver. It's more importantly, perhaps, a partnership with the receiver.
Mm-hmm.
And I really feel strongly about that word, because I think it connotates respect,
Mm.
again, on both sides, the giver, the receiver. I think that I just think that it's a critical word, and it's a word that I think is lacking in some organizations, who see themselves almost as the benevolent saviors. In other words, we give, we give, we give. Look at what we give.
Yeah.
But there's not a real awareness of what they receive in giving and what the recipients give
Mm-hmm.
in receiving.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't thought about that until we started talking this morning. Yeah. But that whole concept of respect is so critical, I think.
Yeah.
Respect for human beings, and I see that as really a very critical component of any compassion
Mm-hmm.
that we have. Compassion would be another word, of course.
Yeah.
That I think is a good word. Of course, I love the word hope, because that's a real biblical word for me.
Yeah.
But just a really critical word, I think, for our world,
Mm-hmm.
in that we need it so much. We so need something to hang on to. And again, because of my, I probably should have said, I became for 9 years the 4 years that I was chair of the board of Church World Service, I was also director of Reformed Church World Service for the Reformed Church in America. And in that capacity, I traveled, Somalia, Afghanistan, many countries in Africa, a lot of countries in Central America, and saw so much. Also, of course, I was very involved with disasters in the United States. How could we ever forget Katrina, Hurricane Katrina? Oh my goodness. And so I had the privilege of meeting so many recipients of our resources and gifts. Yeah. And that was always a very humbling thing for me. So now, looking back, of course, that really colors. I remember some of these people. Yeah. I remember the wonderful woman in Nicaragua who, as I got on our bus, I think I was a part of a Church World Service delegation. In fact, I know I was. As I got on the bus, she said, "Now, Betty, remember me." I preached a whole sermon on that, on remember me, because she and her daughter had planted 2,000 saplings, 2,000 on her property, and had hand watered all 2,000 of those to try to stop erosion, because they lived on one of the hillsides that had been devastated in one of the earthquakes, I suppose, the flooding. And of course, they lived on the bad land. And so to try to stop erosion and to try to save some resources in terms of having enough water, they had planted these 2,000 saplings. And we were out there walking in the shade of these saplings. And then she took us to her well. And since planting the saplings, she was her water supply had increased
Hmm.
in her little well. We'll talk about.
Yeah.
Very easy to remember her.
Mm-hmm.
Very, and her wonderful teenage daughter. That was just so, it was such a basic thing. And of course, then in my mind comes the share the cup of water, but talk about resilience and strength. All I could think of was the back-breaking labor of trying to plant those saplings in that dry earth. It's not easy.
No.
And she and her daughter had done it.
If I listen to you, I heard words like partnership, respect, resilience. And if I would ask you, to name one colleague or one person that you know through CWS, or a partner or a supporter, who best embodies what Church World Service is about, according to you, who would you name and why?
Oh boy, that's a really difficult question for me, because I guess, as I have already revealed, for me, the great partnership was through the Emergency Response Office of Church World Service under the leadership of Rick Augsburger and Donna Durr. They were just a lifeline.
Yeah.
For me personally, as a denominational executive in charge of relief and development and refugee response, absolutely invaluable. But that kind of is then when I moved on. I retired from the denomination in the fall of 2007.
Yeah.
After I was finished, I decided my time was done and I retired. I've already alluded to one international partner, which was Action by Churches Together. For me, but again, you see, that is because of coming from a church background, and that was really important for me to have that connection. I probably should stop, because you said to name one. I've already named two different levels. I always, on my international studies, had great respect for UNICEF. Not studies, international travels. I had great respect for the work UNICEF was doing, particularly in Somalia and Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So
Great.
I don't know.
No,
I probably better stop, right?
No, this is great. This is, I don't mind that you cheat a little bit and mention more than one. Betty, when you were talking about, the different responses that you experienced, as a volunteer and then later as a board member, I would like to piggyback a little bit on that, because this is also, the 75th anniversary is also a time, as I mentioned, for CWS to look back, and huge discussions are going on around injustice in the world, and the most prominent one is, of course, racial injustice, Black Lives Matter. So if you look back at what CWS did when you were involved closely with Church World Service, how do you look at that, in terms of did Church World Service always play the right role in fighting injustice? Could we have done certain things better? Can you reflect a little bit on that?
Yes, I can, because obviously I'm still very, very, very connected in terms of the world. That's just who I am.
Yeah.
And I think about it almost every day in light of the current news, good or bad. I think there is always room for improvement. I'm sure we made some mistakes, but I have to honestly say, and I'm saying this in the context of being a board member for the National Council of Churches as well, because there I learned so much from our historic Black communions that, quite frankly, I was not aware of before that connection. I have to say that I feel in what I saw in the field, okay, on my international travels, I always feel that we really were aware of the racial injustices, racial ethnic injustices, and that at least back in the early 2000s, we were really striving and struggling with that reality and our need to do better with the whole issue. And that is why I'm so strong on church world service. That's one of the reasons, because I use the word respect. I felt that church world service was one of the organizations, and let me tell you, in my position in the Reformed Church in America, I had a lot of interaction with other organizations, okay, for whom this was not one of their more important criteria for operation. And it made me sick because of the difference was so glaring. Okay, so I know we weren't perfect, but I really feel that we were very aware, and we're trying. You know, that's I guess that was, we were all very aware of it. I was certainly very aware of it as chair of the board. And John, John was wonderful to work with, but we certainly talked about that a lot in trying to guide the organization together.
And when you speak about John, you speak about our CEO, John McCullough. And were you the first chair for when John started, or the second?
I was the second.
Second.
I was the second. Pat, and I was his first vice chair. So I was really, the first vice chair is really in on most everything. So we started with John.
Okay, great. I have two last questions for you, and they are a little bit lighter, right? I think, but I think they're fun as well. I love music, and that's why I always ask a music-related question. If I ask you to come up with a song or a piece of music that represents church world service from your point of view, what is the song or the piece of music that you would share?
Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, Ode to Joy, because it gave me so much joy to work with church world service. And I say that both with my colleagues on the board and my partners around the world. It gave me great joy to learn so much about other cultures and other racial ethnicities. I remember a night in Afghanistan when I was on an official, part of an official church world service delegation. Those were dicey times in Afghanistan, but we were having dinner with a lady who had been the Secretary of Education in this was after the transfer of power and stuff. And we were sitting on the floor, and the meal she prepared was wonderful. It was very sobering, because she told us her story But it was also very joyful to know that we could, at that time, try to be a part of the solution in a very respectful way. So, ode to joy. There you are, Maurice.
Great. I will note that down. Yeah. Okay, my last question, Betty, is what do you would like to say or to wish for CWS?
I just hope that Church World Service can continue to be the beacon of light that it's been for so many for the past 75 years. I personally have encountered people who were refugees resettled after World War II, 75 years ago, who credit Church World Service with being that beacon of light for them. And so I just hope that we can continue as an organization to be, well, perhaps we should say, maybe we could go back to the help and hope, but I kind of like beacon of light for as many people as possible. That would be my wish and my hope.
Great. Thank you so much for your time and your willingness to talk with me today. And thank you for everything you've done for Church World Service and for who you are as well.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
Do you see me? Will you be the eyes so that we all can be?
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram. And if you want to know more about Church World Service, please go to cwsglobal.org.